Hey there! Today, I want to share some thoughts from Hebrews chapter 11, verses 8 through 20, the story of Abraham, a central figure in faith, often called our spiritual father. So, let's dig into what makes his journey so meaningful. Abraham's story begins with a remarkable act of faith. God calls him to leave his home for a land that he would later inherit, even though Abraham had no idea where he was going. Picture that, a man older in years, trusting God enough to pack up and move without a clear destination. He lived in tents as a stranger in the promised land, just like his descendants Isaac and Jacob, all holding on to the hope of a city God was building, a heavenly place with firm foundations. Now, Abraham's faith wasn't just about leaving home. Even when Abraham and Sarah were way past childbearing age, she had never had children. They believed God's promise that Abraham would have countless descendants. And despite their laughter at the idea, God fulfilled it, promising descendants as numerous as the stars and grains of sand. This shows us faith is not always easy or logical. It often calls us to believe when the odds seem impossible. But the passage also reminds us that these faithful people, including Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, never actually received all the promises in their lifetime. They lived as sojourners or temporary residents on earth, looking forward to a better heavenly country. That image of being aliens and strangers echoes throughout the Bible, even in the New Testament, reminding believers that our true home isn't this world but a city God has prepared for us. Faith, as defined in Hebrews, is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. It means trusting God even when we can't see the outcome, and this trust requires action obedience. Abraham obeyed even when God tested him by asking him to sacrifice Isaac, the very son through whom the promises were supposed to be fulfilled. Imagine that tension. Yet Abraham believed that God was powerful enough to raise Isaac from the dead if needed. And just before the sacrifice, God provided a ram instead. That story speaks volumes about trust and obedience. Faith isn't just belief. It's trusting God enough to act, even when we don't understand the path or the timing. It reminds me of how we trust many things daily, like doctors, medicines, or even gravity, which we can't see but know works. Faith in God is like that trust, but on a spiritual level. It calls us to obey God's calls, forgive, pray for others, stand firm in our beliefs, even when it's hard. Speaking of hardness, Abraham's journey was far from easy. He and his family lived as nomads, with no permanent home, constantly moving forward by faith. They were strangers in a foreign land, but their eyes stayed fixed on the promise of the heavenly city. This is a powerful metaphor for us, too. As Christians, we are sojourners here, called to live differently, sometimes feeling out of place, but always hoping for the world to come. Of course, faith isn't without its battles. The enemy to faith is doubt, uncertainty, fear, hesitation. But the message is clear. When God calls us to step out in faith, we should resist the flood of doubt. Sometimes faith requires waiting, sometimes for years or even generations, like Abraham and Sarah waited around 25 years for their promised child. Waiting is hard, especially when we want immediate answers, but faith means trusting God's timing, not ours. So, what does obedience mean in our daily lives? It might be something practical. Visiting someone sick, forgiving an enemy, defending Christ openly, or giving up personal pleasures that pull us away from God. Faith without action isn't really faith. It's dead, as James tells us. God calls us not just to believe, but to live out that belief in tangible ways, no matter the cost. And that brings us full circle. Abraham is called father of many nations, not just because of his natural descendants, but because his faith becomes ours, a spiritual inheritance for all who trust in God. Romans 4 tells us the promise comes by faith, guaranteed to all who follow Abraham's example, believing in God, who can make life out of dead things. If you're listening today and considering your own faith journey, know this: God loves you, and nothing is impossible for those who believe. Jesus died and was raised so we can have hope, even when the path ahead is uncertain. The question remains, are you ready to take that pilgrimage of faith, to trust and obey, even without seeing the full picture? Thanks for joining me in this reflection on Abraham's faith. I hope it encourages you to hold on, keep trusting, and move forward, because that's really what faith is about, living as though God's promises are true, even when we can't see them yet.